Hello and welcome to the Spark Show. In this episode, I'm talking with Jeremy Ryan Slate, founder of the Create Your Own Life podcast, which studies the highest performers in the world, and CEO of Command Your Brand, which helps entrepreneurs get their message out by appearing as guests on podcasts. Welcome, Jeremy.
Hey, I'm really stoked to be here with you today.
Me too. I have so many questions, and my audience is very intrigued about audio and podcasts. So I'd love to just get started on how you got started with podcasting and why was it your preferred method of communication?
So this is gonna sound funny, but like the reason, so my master's degree, I guess is kind of the best place to start. My master's degree is in early Roman Empire propaganda. Not a very like applicable skill
What?
in the world of like getting a job. I took Latin for 14 years. Like it's fun when you travel because like when you go to places where the Romans have been, like I would tell the stories, and my wife's like, "This is great." But like when you want to get a job, it's not really a good thing. So I actually ended up teaching high school for a couple years out of school. And I'd been listening to podcasts since like 2007. Wow, I'm kind of like dating myself now. When a lot of them were like audiobooks and stuff like that. And there's still one podcast that I listen to this day that I think they're on like 1,400 episodes now. It's called The No Agenda Show. So I'd always loved podcasts. And my mom ended up having a really bad stroke in 2012. And it made me kind of, take a look at a lot of what I was doing. And I realized like I just wasn't super happy, in the world I was in. And I went into try and start my own business. So I started first with network marketing, which I was not very good at. I went from there to then private labeling and selling products on Amazon. I sold life insurance. Like I tried all these things and they just didn't work. Right. So I started a podcast because, as I mentioned, my master's is like this highfalutin thing. So my writing wasn't very easy for other people to like understand. So for me, it just made a lot more sense to start a podcast. I could talk to people. So that's honestly where it came from. It was more of like I wasn't understandable, so I needed to be in a place where people could like get me, I guess.
That's awesome. And I love how you talk about Roman Empire. The last international trip that my husband and I took, we were in Italy, in
Mhm.
Naples, and there's so much history there. And so you would have been a great guide, I think, during that
It,
trip.
it's fu- it's funny too because I don't know, I'm just like I'm naturally one of these people that just likes to tell stories. So like when you're traveling, like and I start like talking something, like some other people that speak English hear you and they start following you. My wife's like, "There's another tour happening. Please stop."
You're that guy. Oh my
I'm that
gosh.
guy. Like my daughter's two, and we have another one on the way. Like I can imagine I'm gonna be that annoying father one day that just doesn't shut up.
That's so funny. So my audience are mostly influencers, entrepreneurs. Lots of them are
Hmm.
content creators, and a lot of them kind of are looking at like video, and they're looking at blogging, and they're looking at YouTube and Instagram. And not a lot of people think about adding a podcast to
Hmm.
their platforms. And so, do you think everyone should have a podcast? Like, what are the things to consider?
Hmm.
Um, if someone's interested in doing a podcast or starting a podcast.
So I don't think that everybody should have a podcast, and the reason I say that is because I think there's too many people trying to copy other people. You know what I mean? Like that they're ripping off this influencer and ripping off that influencer. And I think unless you're truly different in what you're doing and you're truly differentiated, like it just doesn't make a ton of sense. So I always recommend to people like before you're going to start a podcast, like number one, decide what your differentiator is, but number two, like start having conversations on other podcasts because you kind of learn a little bit more about what your message is. You learn a little bit more about how you're delivering it in audio. And at the same time, you understand what the other side of that mic, is like. And at the same time, I find that like working on some of the hard skills is really, really important. Like I wasn't originally, a very good interviewer. I like to think I am now, not to toot my own horn, but I like to think I am now, but that took me 200 interviews to feel good about it. So you have to be willing to commit to that process. And if you're somebody that's not willing to see this out past 6 months, then I wouldn't do that. So differentiate, be willing to commit to the process and be willing to create something really, really valuable for the people listening to you.
I love how you talk about commitment because I feel like that's with any content creator. I mean,
Yeah.
people love the idea of getting to millions of followers and doing all that stuff. But if you're not willing to do it consistently, it's not going to happen. Like, I'm sure you understand this as well, having your own podcast and
Yeah.
seeing all these high performers and high achievers. It's really that consistency that sets you apart from everyone else trying to create that platform.
And it's a little bit of professionalism too. And that doesn't mean like you need to have the best audio and stuff like that. But at the same time, like, I've run a running content calendar for 6 years. So I know like what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and things like that. And it's just a bit of predictability, like you said. Like there's the term is called pod fading, right? When somebody doesn't make it in their podcast world. And there's only like 18% of all the podcasts out there. I think it's like 2.2 million or something like that out there now. There's only about 18% of those that actually produce an episode even every month. So to really do well, you don't have to commit very much to do well, which is kind of interesting.
You're speaking my language, Jeremy, because I am a big proponent of content calendars. I came from the entertainment world where there's like a production calendar, there's planning meetings, there's filming days, there's all of those things actually happen. And sometimes when people think about, oh, I just want to start a podcast or YouTube channel, or I want to start blogging, or want to go on Instagram, they don't have that kind of scope and overview and kind of that perspective that you kind of need to step back and like have a plan and strategy in place first.
And I think too, that's where like having like a PR viewpoint and understanding that world has really, really helped me, because at the same time, like you understand, like somebody has to have a reason to do media, right? Like maybe there's a book coming out, maybe there's something they're doing at that time. Like they may not want to do an interview at a certain point in time because they don't have a media push. So it's understanding that, and also understanding like what's relevant now, right? So like we just put out an episode 2 weeks ago that related to the history of the NFL and the legacy of Tom Brady before the Super Bowl. Like, yeah, it's great to talk about that all year, but it also has a relevancy thing as well when you can kind of, catch that traffic in different social networks.
I love how you talk about that, because we also are big in like creating calendars for our students, and we tell them 2 months out. And in the brand world and the brand sponsorship world, which I talk about a lot, it's this came similar with like pitching, right? You don't want to be pitching in the wrong window because they're just going to say no. And
Right.
If you pitch too late, the budget's already been spent. And so you kind of need to think about it strategically as far as trending and trends and events and stuff that's currently going on.
And two, from that perspective, I like to tell people, if you're trying to score a really cool interview, like one of the things to take a look at, and I can't remember, I think it's upcoming release is what the category is called on Amazon, but there's actually a category of all the books that are scheduled for the next 6 months that you can see on Amazon. So you can take a look at like who's writing a book. Like I was trying to get in on it for Matthew McConaughey's latest launch. I missed it. We didn't get in on it. But like understanding where some of these new books are coming out can actually help you to get some really, really great interviews, because they just don't do media all the time.
That's such a great tip. Everyone, write that down right now. I didn't even know this.
I don't remember what the exact name of the category is, but it's like upcoming releases or something like that in the books category in Amazon. It's a really, really handy thing to watch.
Yeah, because then that's the time that where they're trying to land as many interviews and get out as much as possible. And so they're willing to probably talk to more people. So that's such a great tip. Thanks, Jeremy.
Absolutely.
So you talked a little bit earlier about what I wanted to talk to you about, which was guesting on podcasts, as opposed to starting your own podcast first. Like a lot of people get intimidated by like the equipment and like the content calendars and the strategies, but there are podcasts out there who are always currently looking for guests. And so why do you think that's like a better way to go right now? And how do you think someone can fit that into their own like content or media strategy?
Well, I think number one, like I know for myself, like I do episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, my own show. Like that's a big commitment. We do have a production team, we do have, a designer and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, like it's a big commitment to take that amount of content going. Like I'm going away for the next 10 days. So we had to make sure like, hey, we've got episodes in the can through the beginning of March to make sure that's all set. So there's a lot of things you have to think of. That's a bigger commitment. But in terms of being a guest, there's the benefit of, getting clear on your own story because you're telling it a number of times, which is a huge benefit. So when you're going to actually host a show, you're more comfortable with it. But then at the same time, you're getting in front of audiences that are already established. You're not building one. So you're kind of building an audience from audiences that already exist. But I think a lot of times people try to start from ground zero, and you may have a big audience in other places like Instagram, like Twitter, like all these different places, but they may not translate to your podcast, right? Because it's a different medium. So you always want to think about where established audiences I can get in front of. But at the same time, you have to show up as somebody valuable, willing to serve that show, because they're not going to be willing to have somebody in front of their audience because, hey, you and I have both taken time to build these audiences. So we're very particular about who we have on. So you have to, at the same time, respect the integrity of that show. But I think there's a ton of benefit if you're willing to put in the time and really show up as somebody willing to teach and learn.
Yeah, that benefit just of like having an audience, it's basically the essence of influencer marketing, right? There
Right.
are already influencers, there are already podcasters who have for many, many years shown up on a regular basis. Oh my God, you do 3 times a week. I don't know how you do that.
It's a lot of recording, let me tell you that.
Yeah, and like you said, you wouldn't just have some random person on your podcast that isn't going to give value to your audience, to the audience that you've built. Similar to with influencers, they're not just going to partner with a brand, any brand that doesn't necessarily align with their audience, and just put them on out there and just to do an ad or a sponsorship. So we totally understand that. And I love that you talk
that's the
about.
same. I don't want to interrupt you, but there
Oh,
is
go
this,
ahead.
that's the same viewpoint. Like as a host, right? Like as an influencer, you're talking about like partnering with these different advertisers and whatnot. If you don't actually agree with what that company stands for, you're hurting your audience's trust in you. It's the same thing with a guest, right? If I bring on somebody that doesn't have value to my audience, like that hurts me and what I'm delivering, and it hurts the brand. So it's just something you have to think with. But do continue. I didn't mean to cut you off there. It just was relevant.
Oh no, totally. I totally agree with that. I say that to my students all the time, right? It's like not worth the post of the money that you're making to break that trust with your audience that probably took years to build. Totally not worth it.
Absolutely. And you were saying something else, and then I cut you off so rudely.
I don't know. I don't remember. What was I saying? So you talked about being clear on your story and your messaging. I think this
Yeah.
is something that a lot of influencers, especially in the beginning when they're just starting out, they don't really have that brand identity nailed. And so, like, what do you think people should do, or what are some tips for getting that story kind of tightened up before you reach out to podcasts to be a guest?
So we have a methodology that we call story, message, and call to action. Now, the thing I tell people is, yes, there's 3 parts to it, but please do not make this a rote thing. Like I know, at least as in a host perspective, I've had people on my own show where I actually stopped the guy once. I'm like, dude, are you reading? Like, what's happening here? Like, that's not the point to this. But you want to take a look at, relevance is kind of something we've been talking about here. And when you're looking at your own story, you've got a very long story to your life. Like, you asked me in the beginning, like, how did I get into podcasting? Well, my whole life isn't relevant to how I got into podcasting. The thing you want to learn when you're telling your story is, where's the story of transformation in your own story that kind of connects with what you talk about and what you teach with, right? And that's how you're going to connect those two things. So your personal story shows transformation, it creates trust, and it gives you permission to then teach. And in that message portion, you're looking at your 3 to 5 key things where you talk about absolutely everything around that, not to the point of overwhelming, but enough that somebody feels like they get a ton of value out of it. And then it leads into your call to action, what you want people to do at the end. And it's not as simple as like, oh, here's my story, here's my message, all right, go buy my stuff. Like, that's not the point. The point is here, like, you're creating trust and giving the ability to teach. You're teaching, and then you're giving people an ability to continue that relationship elsewhere. Because so many times people get on podcasts and they'll say, all right, so here's the 5 different places you can find me. And you have to understand, once again, relevance. Where's your audience? They're usually doing something else. Like, they're driving, they're in the gym, they're working. Well, hopefully they're working if they're listening to you, whatever it is. So you want to understand that, and you only want to send people one place, right? Like, the single place you're going to send people, hey guys, I talked about how you can be a great guest on podcasts today. I have an awesome offer for you about blah, 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 and you can get it here. Like, you really want to kind of make it very, very clear and make it a relationship continuance thing. It's not a sales pitch, if that makes sense.
So many good points there. And I think there is like definitely a preparation that has to go into it. Like, having your talking points, being able to not just read and kind of go through like word for word memorizing your brand value proposition and all that marketing talk. But it does help when you're prepared on like, okay, I have a free guide, and it's not like a really long link that nobody can remember or anything like that. So I love how you talk about being prepared and having those talking points, and then having a call to action if it does provide value to the audience.
Right. And at the same time, like, something you just said, which is really important, is like the relevance to that show as well. Like, and the way I explain this is, there's different lenses that people are going to see you through, right? You could be a mom, you could be an entrepreneur, you could be an artist, whatever it is. And on that show you're appearing on, like there may be a different way they're looking at you. So that means you need to show up on that show in the lens that they're looking to see you through. So that's kind of the way that I explain it, because it needs to be relevant. I feel like we've been talking about relevance this whole show, but it's really vital, right? To be relevant in the situation. And that's why you learn how to tell your story in different ways, because every show isn't going to want to hear your story the same way or receive your message in the same way. So you need to make it in a way that's going to work for them and impact for them.
This kind of reminds me of the time when I get pitched by brands to work with them, and it's a beer brand, and I'm not really a beer drinker, so it like would not make sense, right? And so as much as like
pitched like a man's like grooming company. And I'm like, nothing against that, but that would really feel kind of weird for me. Like if my kids heard that or something. So like just not happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, like I think it would probably be good as far as payment, because like,
right.
Michelob Ultra or whatever, but I would never drink it, and so it doesn't make sense. So I think that's like a great analogy for speaking on podcasts and like being a guest on a podcast that doesn't align.
No, 100%. Because like, once again, like I know for myself, like I'm always looking to talk to the highest achievers of the highest achievers. Like I got super excited last night because we actually just booked Mariano Rivera, the former New York Yankee, for the podcast, which I was very excited about. So like for me, I'm always trying to really reach that level. So my audience is expecting that. And it once again goes back to agreement. If you break that agreement, it's very, very hard to get that back. And it's the same thing with advertising, because at a certain point, whether it's on your Instagram account or on your podcast, it is watering down your content a little bit to bring in an advertiser. So it has to be aligned enough that you're willing to do that.
So I want to talk about Command Your Brand, because I see it on your screen. And then great branding, by the way.
Thank you.
And this is what you help people with, right? So can you tell me a little bit more about this service and kind of how you started providing it, and who would it be a good fit for?
So for us, we work with what we like to call visionary founders, people that have a really big vision and they want to make a really big impact. They get the idea of it's the number of people that you help and the number of people that they help that really expands. That's really who we're trying to help. And from that perspective, the way the company started is, honestly, people said to me, hey, can you do for me what you're doing for yourself? Which at that point in time meant starting a podcast. So our first version of the company was we did done for you podcasts for people. And we found out, hey, I'm busy. I love this podcast. Can I just go on other shows? Because part of what we were doing was helping people to get on podcasts. So we just focused on that and we've over the years tried to make that better and better and better. And, we really look at this as we are the PR firm for the podcast space, right? There's a lot of companies out there that book podcasts, but all of my publicists have went to school for PR. We're really trying to make sure that we're treating this where someone gets the right positioning, they get the right call to action, they get the right storytelling, because it's so much more than just going on podcasts. It's a campaign where you're really trying to make a big impact. So that's what we do at Command Your Brand. We help people to locate the right shows, get the right positioning, and tell their story in the right way.
I think that's such a great niche, because there are PR agencies that do, press, TV, and I feel like podcasts, like I haven't heard of any PR firm that's done that before.
And the thing that's interesting about it too is because I think a lot of big PR houses, and I'm sure you get pitched by them too, so like you get it, like they pitch differently than we do as well. Like the number of people that I get for immediate release, like press release as a pitch, it's kind of weird. So we understand the space, but at the same time we have that PR angle on it, and I just don't think anybody else is doing it like that.
Yeah, super unique, and I'm so intrigued by that. I think that's why I was like, you should get back to this guy, because I think it's awesome. So obviously the pitching worked.
I'm glad to hear that.
So what are some of the results and like podcasts that you've gotten your clients on, and like what kind of like what did that translate into as far as your business?
So in terms of like, it depends on like podcast people would know, like, we deal with a lot of like very niche specific shows. So we deal with a lot of people in real estate, or we deal with a lot of people in natural health. So like we've booked Jillian Michaels' podcast before, and Dr. Josh Axe and stuff. We do a lot in the health space. So, there's that end of it, but then also at the same time, there's the part where I need to say these results are not typical. But we had a client in the real estate space that he went on 16 different podcasts. And he did $400,000 in sales directly off those podcasts. And then by his own retargeting, he did an additional $100,000 in sales. So there's that end of it. And then we also had another client that she's an influencer and works a lot with LinkedIn. And we actually got her in front of another really big name influencer that actually ended up hiring her. So there's a lot of like really cool success stories that we've had. And they're not always from the viewpoint of like, I got X number of sales or dollars. There's also those relationships created.
Yeah, and sometimes those relationships are even more valuable than the dollar
Yes,
amount. I totally understand
100%.
that. And really, like, people are busy.
Yes.
Like, I'm busy. And so, like, having someone do that for you who has those connections and already knows people on the back end or the people who are reviewing these podcasts is probably these hosts are busy as well. So, it's such a great service that you guys are providing.
I appreciate that. We make a really big point of, we have this massive database of like every time we talk to a show and we find out exactly what they're looking for. So we only bother them with exactly what they're looking for. But I think doing that, we're able to really help our clients, but also respect the integrity of what hosts are trying to create. Because, for a lot of us, this is our baby.
Yes, definitely. And I mean, we put so much time into it. It's like we don't want to just like have anyone and any random person on.
I agree.
Yeah, and so what do you think for this year ahead? What do you think is kind of the trends that are coming up for podcasting?
Well, number one, I'll just say overall growth. I know like last year, around the time COVID hit, there was kind of this drop off in podcast numbers. But then towards like October, November, there was a trend back up where the year actually finished well over where it was at the beginning of the year. So it's the way I look at that is listening habits had to change a lot. And I think that's interesting. At the same time, I know for myself, I've started doing more video and I've tried to push more video, which has only been like the last, 60, 90 days. But audio is still a lot bigger. It's still like, 80% of all podcast listening is still on audio, which is pretty incredible. So I think number one, it's doing a great job with the audio you're creating. Number two, it's really servicing your audience, but also realizing that their listening habits and where they're listening to you and how they're listening to you has changed. So I think that's the interesting thing. But also like I see a lot of the networks changing, which is kind of interesting. And then also I don't know if this whole Spotify thing is going to work out for podcasting, because I know Joe Budden did like a 2-hour episode about like why he's leaving Spotify and never going back. And I know a lot of investors have been looking at what happened with Joe Rogan, and they're saying, oh, well, we're not making the money we were looking at, because they're trying to make the medium do something different than what it does. This is really a conversational medium driven by hosts. So I think there's a lot of creativity that can come out of 2021, and I'm kind of very excited to see where that goes.
So am I. I'm really excited about just audio making a comeback this year. Are you on Clubhouse, Jeremy?
A little bit. See, this is the problem I run into with that, and it's just kind of been a busy like season of my life. Like we just sold my parents' house, and like, I'm writing a book, so it's like been and this has been a lot of growth for us too. So it's been a busy season of my life, and I just have not spent the amount of time because it requires you to spend some time on it.
Oh my God, lots of time.
Like I'll get a text from a friend being like, "Hey, we're doing a chat. Can you jump in and like talk to the people in here real quick?" I'll be like, "Okay, I'll try." But like it's been a busy season of my life, so I haven't really committed to it like I need to.
It's like a conference call, but all day long.
I just find that hard to do, because there's also like, I don't know about you, but like I'm really into like deep work. Like when I'm doing something, I'm doing something. So it's like I just kind of shut everything off. So I don't know. It just doesn't fit with my brain and how it functions, I guess.
I'm exactly like you, actually. Like I did a couple of rooms and I moderated a bit, but I'm also like head down working on my stuff, and also like the distribution. It's not really optimized for that right now, and so it's only live and that's it. And so it's very real time, and it's good for engaging, but also like we're engaging on other platforms right now.
Yeah, like I do have some friends that have done very well with it. Like my friend Tony Watley went from 0 followers to like 20,000, but he's on it a lot. So I think it is definitely a time commitment. So it also depends on like, what season of your life and your business you're in at the time. I know like we are in a huge growth phase right now, where I've been hiring a lot, I've been training a lot, I've been building a lot of systems. So it's just hard to do at this time.
Totally understand. And so the last thing I kind of want to talk about is impact, because that is the the biggest thing, I think, with any medium, with any type of content you're creating. So I'd love to know just like maybe one or two instances where you were able to feel that direct impact, either through your podcast from someone listening to something and changing perspective, or maybe someone got, an opportunity on guesting on a podcast. Like, what kind of impact have you been able to see through your personal journey with podcasting?
So there's a couple different things. Like growing up, there was, somebody that was a few years older than me that I really respected and looked up to. And, it was the guy that always had it all together. He went to the right school. He got the right degree. He got the right job. And late last year, I got an email where he said, hey, my marriage broke up. I was having a lot of trouble. A lot of things were happening for me. And you may not have known this, but you've kind of been, my rock over the last year. And I'm like, holy crap, man. Like, that's incredible. So like to know that somebody that I respected and that I had a lot of, respect for, I guess, in that case, to see that I helped their life like that. It's like, you're kidding me. Like, so to me, that's just very cool to see it on that level.
Yeah, and that's what I tell my students all the time. Like, you never know who's listening or
Yeah.
watching. They might not be like liking or commenting or sharing or whatever, but they're watching and
Yes.
they're listening.
100%. And that's what the thing that I don't know, I couldn't wrap my head around really in the beginning, because a lot of my, friends and connections and things like that weren't really super supportive in the beginning. Now they are, and I've seen my own fault in it. They've seen their own fault in it, and it's different, but it's something I didn't consider early on. And it, once it hit me, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in the beginning, I feel like no one knows what we're doing, right? A lot of
Yeah.
people still don't understand.
How's that internet money thing going? I'm trying. I know for like 2 years, we were actually doing really well, but my dad was always like asking me if I need money. I'm like, why do you keep doing that? He's like, well, you don't have a job. I'm like, no, I have a job. We built the business. Like, what are you talking about?
It's the same thing with influencers. We're like, are you still taking pictures? Like, are you still on your website on that Instagram thing?
Oh my gosh, I totally can relate.
Yeah, it's still a thing, everyone who's listening. We do make money in this industry, and we also make an impact. So,
Yes.
so many great stories and so many great tips on this episode. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really hope we're able to help your audience today.
Thank you. And make sure that to check out the show notes where we'll have all the links and everything about Jeremy on his podcast and Command Your Brand, which I will be looking into as well. Thank you so much for listening to The Spark Show, and I will see you in the next episode.